Welcome to Lifepoint Online, a very special Mother's Day edition. My name's Dan Sweetman, I'm the Senior Pastor at Lifepoint. I just really wanted to welcome you. Thank you so much for taking some time to watch. Today we want to honour our mums. So if you're a mum out there watching, whether you've got little kids or your kids are grown up, we just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for giving everything. Thank you for not thinking of yourself and all those times worrying about others. Thank you for raising us. I think of Jesus, Matthew 20, he says, the Son of Man has not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life for those who loves. And I just think that's a perfect example of motherhood. That's what mothers do. So thank you. And right from the top too, we just wanted to acknowledge that Mother's Day, is amazing and as beautiful as it is, it can also be a really painful day for some people. Maybe you've lost your mum. Maybe you have a difficult relationship with your mum. Maybe you're a mother and you've got a difficult relationship with a child or an estranged child, or maybe tragically, maybe you've lost a child. And today is a painful reminder of all the things that should be but aren't. Or maybe everything inside of you just longs to be a mum and you're not yet a mum. And today, as everyone's celebrating mums, you're reminded that you would love to have that in your life. You'd love to have a child, but you don't have one. We just want to acknowledge that pain, and we hope you're blessed today as well. Yeah, we want to honour you as well. Jesus has this very dramatic moment it's the climax of the entire Bible, really. It's the crucifixion scene in the Gospel of John. And there's this little story that happens with Jesus and his mum, and it's often overlooked. We often don't even think about it. But I think it's incredible. So he's there on the cross in John 19, and in verse 27, he's literally he's dying for the sins of the world. He's taking on sin onto himself. He's tortured. He's in agonizing pain, and he's literally dying as blood runs out of his body. And he looks up and he sees his mum. He says to her, "Mum, here is your son." He talks to her, and he's talking about his best mate, John. And John's next to her. And one of the last things Jesus does is look after his mum. He says to John, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. He says, "Hey, John, you have to look after my mum, okay? And mum, you look after John." He's actually taking a moment to honour and to look after and to comfort his mum. When talk about having lots to do. Talk about having so many important priorities in that time of his life. And he makes time for his mum. So we want to do that today. I hope you get a chance somehow. I know everyone's situation is different, to honour and to celebrate your mum. And to do actually what Jesus, I think, did here, and to commit to saying, I'm going to look after you, mum, even if you feel like your mum didn't raise you perfectly. We know that mothering can look very different, have all different shapes and sizes, and we just wanted to have a look at that now. We're going to hear some stories from some Lifepoint women about motherhood and how they've encountered God in motherhood and all the different ways that can look. So thanks, check it out.
Do you love mum?
Yeah. Probably my mum hack, I don't know, would probably come from my mum, but I haven't mastered it. And that is my mum always says that to master sort of being stress-free is to make sure that you're just on top of everything, which I'm not mastered at. So for me, I've actually probably learnt that I've just got to give myself a lot of grace. Do your best, but don't be hard on yourself.
A good life tip that I've found, having a little Elijah, who's one, is to always pack togs and a towel, because you never know what type of adventure you're going to get on. Like, you leave the house and you're like, oh, we're just going for a stroll, but then you end up in the mud pit, having a mud fight. So that's been one for me, to always have that on hand, just in case you want to do a different adventure.
Yeah, so we're here and we're talking about our lovely mum, Christina.
Our mum, yeah.
We love her, she's good.
Yeah, she's really good. We love how she always takes care of us really good and takes time for us all the time, yeah.
Yeah, she's done well raising us considering the circumstances.
She's very brave and very strong. Taking care of 5 kids, being a single mum, she's very, very strong, and she sacrifices a lot for our family.
I think for me, I think I had to just try and do as much as I could for my kids, and then I've learnt that there has to be a balance as well, because I burnt out about 7 years ago when I separated from my husband. I became a single mum of all 5 of them. So I burnt out pretty quickly, and I learnt very early on, like, God basically shouted out to me that I needed to be my kids' disciple. So I basically then decided to stay home and work out how I can earn an income from home, and then also just be as present as I can for my kids. So I think I've just tried to, nurture them as much as I could, be there for them as much as I could, speak into their lives as much as I could, and just enjoy them at all their different stages. And I've loved it.
And then where the ladies at? Yeah. Say hello. Say hello. Oh, you're shy. You're good. Something that God has really taught me in this journey is the capacity of love. And also I've seen that in my mum, my own mum as well, is, they're there for you no matter what, like how great you treat them, or how maybe not so great some days you treat them. And that's the same with like Elijah, if he's not going to sleep or anything like that. Like, I love him to the moon and back, and nothing really gets in the way of that love. So yeah, just my capacity has grown so much, or just being like unveiled in becoming a mum, of like just the greatness and how big love I have to give.
So I'd like to honour 2 mums today. Obviously my biological mum, who has been such a hero all my life and has really come a long way with my own walk with God, which has been so amazing. And then I'd also like to just acknowledge my spiritual mum, Mary Coleman. What a little hero. Yeah, so I grew up in a non-Christian family, so when I became a Christian, it was in Lifepoint, and I didn't have Christian parents. Carl and Mary took that role on for some of us. So that was like Trudy and myself. So they would just be so open and so willing to listen to us and just speak God's truth into our lives in a very new world for us. I think from my own family, Mum was very intentional about spending time as a family in the nights, and she says that it shouldn't have worked, but somehow it did, and I think it's hilarious but also beautiful. So we would have family dinner, and then afterwards we would play games. So us as children, we get to choose what we did. So obviously as little kids, it was something like, "What's time, Mr. Wolf?" So then our parents, they would like get us all revved up, and then for like half an hour be playing these games, and then be like, "Okay, up to bed." And we would just, it was weird that it worked, but it was just this beautiful time of coming together as a family and laughing and having fun. And that's something that I think I would take into my own family, because it's just like that quality time is so important.
I think mothers can be really hard on themselves, and that really then can cause a lot of bitterness, resentment, comparing to other people, wishing things were different. I think those things are very toxic, especially in your marriage or in your own self, in the way that you raise your kids. Placing our expectations on them, and even thinking what other people's expectations should be of them, is quite negative and quite hurtful. So I think your only guide should just be, praying through it and asking God, how do you want me to help this kid of mine? How do you want me to help my marriage? How do you want me to, overcome this, feeling of whatever it might be, resentment or bitterness or not being enough? I think those things are really, really important to try and catch.
So an encouragement that I would give, other than become a part of a community or find your little group of girls that you can really just message anytime and lean on when times are good and when they're not so good, is to really be kind to yourself. And as long as your baby's like fed, loved, clean and hugged at the end of the day, like you've done an amazing job. It doesn't matter if you haven't done that sensory little play or like this little adventure or that. Like I feel like just having those key things taken care of for you and your little one is really like the best thing ever. So just be really kind to yourself and you're doing an awesome job.
To see all these different mothers, like all my friends that have become mothers, and Mary's love for like even myself or her kids, it's so deep and it's so genuine and it's so unconditional. And then you read that God's love is more than that, is just, it's just profound.
Do you love Mummy? I love you. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Oh. Bye.
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 It's beautiful. Thanks so much for sharing that one, guys. And there are hundreds of stories of mothers in our church, and I'd just love to hear them all. So we were meant to be in person today, okay, but it didn't work out. We're in the middle of a new series called Investing in the Next Generation, very appropriate for Mother's Day. We're going through a letter by this guy named Paul the Apostle, to someone he called a spiritual son, to Timothy. Now just a bit of context, all right? We're going to look at it for just a quick moment now. So Paul is an apostle, he's a missionary, he's going around planting churches, and he's got this young guy, Timothy. He's actually got lots of people he's mentoring and investing in, but one of his really special ones was Timothy. Timothy's senior pastor now at the church at Ephesus, a little church. He's having a really hard time, and Paul's also having a ridiculously hard time. Paul's about to die. He's about to be executed. He's in prison, and one of the last things he does is invests into Timothy and sends him this letter. It's called 2 Timothy because it's the second letter we have in the Bible to Timothy from Paul. So I just want to look really quickly at this little verse. It's actually verse 5 in 2 Timothy chapter 1. We had a little look at it last week at church, and I'm just going to delve a bit more into it. It's very appropriate for Mother's Day, you'll see. Let's start in verse 3, actually. I thank God whom I serve, as my ancestors did, with a clear conscience, as night and day. I constantly remember you, Timothy, in my prayers. Recalling your tears, I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy. And I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also. Paul says, did you hear him talking about his ancestors? He's like, Tim, I'm part of a great tradition of people passing on their faith and investing in the next generations, going all the way back to Abraham. He says, and don't forget you too, Timothy. You've been invested in too. Someone's passed on their faith to you. What about your grandmother, Lois, and your mother Eunice? Now, these guys were of Jewish descent. Tim's dad apparently was a Greek descent guy, and he obviously had his faith passed on from his grandma and his mum, who were probably new Christians in a town called Derbe or Lystra, we don't quite know. And so what they did is they somehow, from birth, actually it says here in chapter 3, verse 15, they get another shout out in the Bible. It says, how, Tim, from infancy you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. Imagine getting a shout out in the Bible. The most famous book, the best-selling book, the most read book, the most transformative book in history, and here are your names going down. Two seemingly very humble women whose huge contribution was passing on their faith to their grandson, their son, named Timothy. So I want to put something to you today. If you have a great gift, if this gift, Paul calls it sincere faith. He's talking about real faith. He's talking about people that are fully devoted followers of Jesus. Not getting it right all the time, but really want to get it right and love God and have a real relationship with Jesus. If that's you, if you're in that category, it's time to pass it on. I'm sorry to use this language, but let's not be constipated Christians. All right? Faith is meant to be passed. I'm sorry, I know it's a bit of a disgusting metaphor for Mother's Day, but I wanted to shock you because we have to be people that pass our faith on. Let me put something to you, okay? I was challenged by this years ago, and it really changed, especially as a dad, but just as a Christian, with people I can invest in the next generation with. The most important thing is not what you do, but who you raise. The most important thing you could do in this life is not some great action, although you really should put this into action. It might be someone you raise up. Timothy's had his faith passed on to him, and that revolutionized his entire life. Who are you raising? Now for parents, that's easy. You can kind of look around and say, okay, they're in my house, this is who I'm raising. But this goes for non-parents as well. Like Paul was a single guy. He didn't have his own children, and yet Paul raised up powerful, incredible people of faith because he invested in them. He raised up Tim. He raised up Silas. He raised up Titus. He raised up Phoebe. He raised up Lydia. He raised up all of these powerful people that we hear about in the Bible that changed the world. One of Paul's greatest things is not that he went around planting churches, but he went around investing in people and changing their lives. So my question is really simple today. It's an easy one. Who are you raising? Who will come up to you? Will anyone come up to you one day and say, wow, look at them. They have a sincere faith because you have passed it on. That's what Paul could say to Eunice. Who's going to give you a shout out? Because you are investing your life in the next generation. That is what the next generation needs. Someone who's going to do that, just like Paul did. And just like Timothy then spent his life doing. I reckon it's amazing that Eunice, a mum, and sometimes mums, people say just a mum. I don't like that phrase because I think motherhood is probably the most important role in our whole society. Motherhood and fatherhood. Parenting is just so vital and it can't be overlooked. It can't be looked down upon. In a culture where individual achievement and self-fulfillment and kind of self-realization and self-esteem is so important, I think the most important thing we can do is raise the next generation. Because you know what? The reality is you're not going to be here one day. But the work you've put into the next generation, that will live on. Maybe even to the next, and the next, and the next. That's how it works. So today, I want to kind of see what this looks like in action. So we're going to hear from someone, a real life Eunice. She's someone who's very special in my life. She's my mother-in-law. I was going to do a bad mother-in-law joke, but I figured that's in bad taste on Mother's Day. So I won't say anything funny, but she really is a real life Eunice. She's been someone who's passed on her faith to her children. She's got 4 kids. I'm biased. I think the eldest is the best because I'm married to her. 4 incredible kids. They all love God. They're all following Jesus. And that is no small achievement. In today's culture, the stats seem to say that 70 to 80% of young people will leave the church. They will not follow in the faith of their parents. So we're just going to hear briefly now from Denise. We're going to hear about her story. And the thing I love most about Denise's story is that it's imperfect. There's a lot of brokenness. There's a lot of things that went wrong. And it's a beautiful story, not just of her trying her best in a really broken situation. It's a story of God's grace. So, Steph's going to interview her. Thanks, Denise.
Hi everyone, it's so great to have you with us on Mother's Day. My name is Steph and I'm going to be joined by my wonderful mum Denise, and we're going to be sharing a little bit today. I'm going to be asking her some questions about her childhood and her journey with Jesus and just how that has affected her mothering journey as well. Thank you so much for coming, Mum.
You're welcome.
Now, we're going to be sharing quite rawly today, so if we get a few tears, that's okay and to be expected, okay? All right?
Yep.
Prepare yourselves. Okay, I'm going to jump straight in, Mum, okay? So can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and your journey with your mum?
So I suppose I just want to acknowledge, though, that there'd be a lot of people that could relate to my childhood story, because it's not uncommon. And my parents themselves had a difficult childhood and had significant difficulties in their own childhood. But my upbringing was an upbringing full of a lot of drinking and a lot of violence as a child. And that really impacted the relationship that I had with particularly my mum. I really didn't ever know her. I didn't know the person that she was. And I didn't really have a relationship with her at all. When I was 14, she passed away, and that really was the end of any hope of having a relationship with her at all.
Yeah, that would have been so devastating. And like you said, I know that there will be people listening that can relate to having a not so perfect relationship with their parents. Tell us more, like how did that, you've got 4 children yourself, me being the eldest.
Yes.
How did, you didn't have a great relationship with your mum. You've said that you barely knew her. How did that impact your mothering journey? Where did you learn to be a mum without that example?
Yeah, so, God was gracious, and I was really fortunate to marry someone like your dad, and who was brought up by a very loving and nurturing, affectionate family, and particularly his mum. And so I would say that I learnt most of it from him, from Andrew. Just those little nurturing skills that I just didn't see as a kid myself.
And like, this is just sharing personally, but for me as your eldest child, I got to see, you like watch Dad be affectionate, and then you got to kind of try out and practice, the things that were lacking in your childhood, so that you were able to then be the mum that you always wished for as a child.
That's right.
That's what I felt
Yes.
as your daughter.
Yeah, that's right.
And so then, you went through life with this up and down broken family relationship. When did you meet Jesus? Can you tell us about that whole story?
Yeah, so when we were teenagers, my mum was in the car with my brother, and they had a crash in our street. And a family that lived up the road from us came out to help Mum and my brother. While waiting for the police, they took them in their house and looked after them. And this family happened to be a Christian family that went to the local Baptist church. And they had 4 boys. And they, at that stage, my brother was in trouble with the police every week. He was stealing cars, and he wasn't in a good place. But regardless of that, they invited him to youth group. They invited him to events at the church and things like that. And he eventually became a Christian in that church. And of course, that led to him starting to talk to me about his faith. And he gave me lots of music cassettes, like Christian music, which I listened to over and over and over again. And, God planted a seed at that stage. And I chose to go nursing because back in those days you had to live at the hospital if you studied nursing. And that was my way out of home, so that was how I chose my career. But the good thing was God had already prepared that I met a bunch of girls that I got on really well with, and they happened to be Christians. And I had lots and lots of conversations with them. They invited me to back then, up at Mount Tambourine, every year there was a youth encounter, and I went along to youth encounter. And just through the speakers and the things I heard, and the support of the other girls, I knew one day that I needed to go for a walk on my own. So I decided I'd go for a bushwalk, and I just headed out. And on that bushwalk, you know, I encountered God. And gave my life to Jesus. And at that moment, I felt a physical lifting of a heavy burden come off my shoulders. And it was a burden I didn't even know I had. And it physically left me.
Yeah, that's amazing, hey? And I think it makes us so emotional because, you know, when you think of the seeds that God was planting all along your life, and even the way that he used those people, you know, that beautiful family that came out and assisted and rescued your mum and my uncle, and, you know, the girls that were placed in your nursing school, and how God has used them to completely change the trajectory of our family's life. Definitely. You know, to cut that cycle of brokenness, you know, has been so significant and so life-changing. And I love how you describe it as a weight being lifted, because, you know, I can only imagine, you know, how the freedom that you would have felt encountering Jesus. That's beautiful, thank you. You have 4 kids that are invested in giving their life to God, following Jesus, and are invested in the church. I'm sure many parents are sitting there wanting to ask you, like, how did you pull that off? What advice would you give in that?
Yeah, and look, God really transformed my hopes and aspirations in that area the day that I chose to follow Jesus, because prior to that, as a non-Christian, I was actually quite pessimistic about marriage and having a family and being a mum myself. Very pessimistic. But God gave me hope that it didn't have to be that way, the difficult and chaotic and traumatic childhood that I had experienced, that he gave me hope that his way is different, and his way is full of hope and you know, transformation. And so really it was through step by step leaning into him and really looking to him for guidance, because I really knew nothing of what I was doing. And he led me, you know, each step of the way.
Yeah. So practically, you know, we've been hearing about in Timothy, 2 Timothy, it talks about, like, you know, the passing on of your faith. What do you think you did to pass on to us kids, you know, the importance of following Jesus?
Yes, yeah. I think for us, we were always, no matter where we were, because we moved around to a few different places where we lived, we always found a church community that we could be a part of, and that our kids experienced other people that you know, told them about Jesus other than us. And we had some amazing people that really journeyed with our kids on that faith journey and brought them to a place that they could make a commitment to Jesus. So that was really important for us, having that church community. The other thing I think is that, again, no matter where we were, I always found that there was a ladies' Bible study group during the week that I could go to, because coming from a non-Christian home, I knew nothing about the Bible. And that weekly study revealed so much to me, and I actually would be quite excited about the things that God was teaching me and revealing to me. And I often found myself at the dinner table just telling you guys about what I'd learnt that day, because it was just so new to me to learn those things in that this Bible study was teaching me. And so there's that. And also, you know, probably the best advice that someone gave us when you guys were quite little was, you know, don't leave prayer up to when your kids are in crisis and there's some family crisis happening, but that it's really important to intentionally make a time each week to pray together, just for your children. And so when you guys were quite small, Dad and I set aside the same day each week, and we would fast either 1 or 2 meals and just pray for your kids. Yeah, and I think that's had a massive impact on our parenting and our ability to parent, but also on all of your lives.
Yeah, totally. Oh yeah, we always know, like, if we've got an issue, we go to Mum, the prayer warrior, and that you will be interceding for us, you know, like you'll be going to God and saying, you know, God, like, would you help us out with this issue? And we know that. And I think exactly what you've said, like, we got to see you and Dad model that, you know, your Christian walk. You know, we didn't grow up with perfect parents or anything like that, but we got to see you guys model what it meant to be, like, holding on to God with all of your might. And we got to see, you guys live an authentic faith that you spoke about regularly. Our commitment to church, you know, like, it was just expected, you know, that we went to church as a family, and just some of those spiritual disciplines, you know, that we talk about, like serving. I remember that, you know, I had to serve as soon as I was old enough to be a teenager, and, you know, wanted to take communion because I wanted to take my following Jesus really seriously. You were like, okay, well, you know, you've got to serve as well. That's part of being in the family of God. And it's really beautiful because I feel like I've really benefited from that. Not only the blessing of the prayer that you prayed over us, I can definitely attribute the blessings in my life to the prayer that you prayed for us kids, but also just the modeling that you did, I think was, you know, really important in looking at you guys and going, yeah, this Jesus following thing is great. Not because it promises a perfect life, but because, you know, it was real to you.
Yeah, definitely.
So not only are you a mum of 4 children, 4 kids that, you know, love God, I'd say that we're pretty decent human beings, but you're also a grandmother. I have 3 children, and I'm also seeing the benefit of your wisdom and your patience, you know, in my life as I now try and be a mother to those kids. You know, I have such a beautiful model. But you also have another qualification. You're employed by the Queensland government to be a child health nurse. You're going into everyday people's homes every week. Can you tell us, what do you think is the most challenging issue for parents that you're seeing these days?
So, I go into a wide variety of families' homes, from families that were very similar to the ones I grew up in, to, the regular, everyday families. And probably a lot of what I see is families trying to do it on their own. They don't have community around them, and they don't even have extended family. And I don't think God ever meant for us to do the parenting journey on our own. He wanted us to do it in community. And so it is really hard for those families. I think the other thing I see as I visit families is I see parents that are really under a lot of stress. They're burdened with stress, and I think that it really limits their capacity to really connect with their children and really have those eye-to-eye, face-to-face, daily interactions that children need every day.
Okay, so if you were to give parents one piece of advice today, what would it be?
I think that in our busy lives right now, if there's one thing that parents can do each day, is to find that one thing to delight in their child, each child every day, and to communicate that delight with that one-on-one, eye-to-eye contact, because to them you are everything. As a mum or a dad, you are their world, and you mean everything to them. And that small interaction every day of just delighting in them means so much to them, and it has such an impact on who they are now, but also a huge impact in the person that they're going to become one day.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for being so open and honest and vulnerable. And personally, thank you for being such an incredible mum. And, you know, I think I can speak for you when, you know, I say mum would be happy to speak to anyone, you know, and like I said, she's a prayer warrior. So if you need some prayer, hit up Denise and Andrew, and they'd love to pray for you. Particularly, this area of parenting and the struggle that it can be. I think you guys are pretty wise when it comes to that. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and sharing your journey. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
So beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Mum. Really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us today. Happy Mother's Day. I hope you get some time with your mum if that's possible for you. We're going to close out our time together right now with a poem, which we don't usually do at Lifepoint. A poem. It's going to be read by Casey Garth, a young mum in our church who actually puts a lot of time and energy in her life into investing into other mums as well. So have a great day, and thanks, Case.
Hi everyone, Casey here. I run a community group called Mama Village. It runs from my house every Wednesday morning in Deception Bay. It's a space that's been created to help mums find connection and support and community throughout the motherhood journey. So if this is something you'd be interested in, or if you've been searching for a mums group for a while now, count this as your invitation to come along. We would love to have you and your children join us. So there'll be some details on the screen below, and get in contact with us if you would love to be a part of Mama Village. As part of Mother's Day today, I would love to read you out a poem. This poem's written by a lady called Sarah Allison. Sarah is a mum herself and has just put together some beautiful words that really capture the motherhood journey. So this poem's called The Call of Motherhood. I won't call it a chore, although it's mundane. I'll call it my beat, and here I will sway. I won't hold on to my youth, I'll give it away to raise my dear children in the Saviour's way. I won't run when my name is called, yet again I'll breathe, and then serve again and again and again. I'll give up my small dreams for something far greater, for in this lies my greatest endeavour. And perhaps, as it often does, after a beautiful surrender, those dreams will return even bigger and brighter. So I'm sure as mums on some part of the journey, we can resonate with Sarah's words there. I really hope that that poem blessed you today and spoke some truth into your heart. Happy Mother's Day!